Everybody, this is our little Sunday meeting I do with my daughter, and I got my son-in-law Anthony. He's going to sit in. They're always welcome to sit. Anthony's always welcome. I don't want to make him feel like, oh, your dad's coming over and he wants me to sit in. But he's always welcome to sit in the videos. We're going to recover. We're going to. I want to just review. I didn't get to listen to the Mass. I usually listen to the Catholic Mass on the radio, and I didn't get a chance today. Oh, I guess I'll start. There's going to be a few. I don't have any notes or nothing, but I told my daughter to remind me. At the end of the video, you need to remind me to finish the dream story.
Okay.
Now, real quick before I forget to start it. The last few weeks I've talked about the Bible and how God was speaking through dreams. Just so happened we got to the book of Samuel, which I taught the other day, and we're at the part where King Saul, which I'm teaching right now, but King Saul says God stopped speaking to him through dreams and through prophets. Also in the book of the first few chapters of Matthew, I've kind of been covering them. And in the story of the birth of Jesus and the story of Joseph having to flee because Herod was going to kill Jesus, I mentioned how in all of those verses it says an angel appeared to Joseph in a dream. And the angel told Joseph, the stepfather, if you will, of Jesus, to flee or to do a certain thing. And it says when Joseph woke up, he obeyed what God told him. And I know sometimes we read through the Bible, and those stories I just quoted are in the Bible, but we might not really pay attention. Like, wait a minute, God spoke through an angel in a dream to people? And then I mentioned one in the book of Acts where Paul the Apostle, because a lot of Christians are not, open to God speaking to them in these types of ways, but Paul one time had a dream at night. He's the great apostle we read about in the book of Acts. And in the dream, there was a man from a city and area called Macedonia. I should do a little bit of Alexander the Great now that I'm getting into Macedonia. But the man in Macedonia said, come, help us. And the apostle Paul, it says, when he woke up, he understood that was God's direction, that was where they were going to go preach. So those are just little examples. Now, I was teaching on some of the dreams I had that were kind of interesting, or some dreams one of my homeless friends, Claire, was sharing with me that she had about me. And whatever she was telling me about the dream, I happened to have just read that chapter that corresponded the night before, and she had no idea I was reading certain things. So let me end that I might put as the bullet points, one of the bullet points of this might be the most important dream yet. And I'll tell it at the end. But I'll begin with this part of it. Sometimes when I'm walking around over the bridge or whatever, also here, I find a lot of balls, baseballs or little types of things. Sometimes I keep them just walking, but I went to HEB in Flower Bluff, and this was last week. And as I got out to the parking lot, obviously somebody just bought, it was like a brand new, small, the size of a softball, but it was a little Christmas ball for a kid. And it was one of those where you bounce it and it lights up. Now, I found stuff like that I've kept, but this was just too nice, and it had little Christmas thing, and somebody must have dropped it. So I picked it up, it was in the parking lot, and I threw it in the car. And then, I'll tell you this part, then we'll finish at the end. I had a dream, and in the dream, after teaching about dreams, in the dream, I heard the name Zachary, okay? And when I woke up, sometimes you'll forget things. When I woke up, I knew whatever else I dreamed about, I remembered the name Zachary. So when I woke up, because that's what I remembered, I didn't write it down, but I made a mental note, and I said, there's going to be something I know about a Zachary that I'm not aware of. I said, something's going to come up in the next week. So this is like a little clinic, if you will, for those who maybe are new to some of this, okay? And that's what I did, all right? Now I'm going to start the teaching, and at the end you'll have to remind me.
Okay.
Also, my friend Jimmy came by. Let me do this real quick. I always try and tell a few stories about some of the guys. Jimmy D, those of you know watch videos know Jimmy. He came by this morning right at about 10:30 when I was getting ready to go to church. But it wasn't a big thing, and he rang the bell, and I said, "Oh, I'm just getting ready to go." And Jimmy's where he's at because of the drug problems he has had that he's talked about on my videos. And but sometimes I'm, short with the guys, or mad or mean, or I've yelled at them a few times. But I thought, oh, I'm not in the mood right now, and in my mind, I think about I've tried to help Jimmy. I helped him before getting an apartment. He got it with the VA, and he lost it. He lost it because he let people come in an apartment. They were partying. They couldn't. So it's easy to say, you're where you're at, brother, because of what you're doing, which is basically the problems with drugs. So, but that was in my mind. But then he asked if I had $1 for the bus pass or for a bus ticket. He had a bus pass, but they expire. It was legit because I seen him at the bus stop when I was leaving, and he wants to leave town. He goes out to the country. So he said, I'm going back out there, John. I know where he goes to. And I said, yeah, I'll give you $1, Jimmy. I didn't give my $1 away. I give one away every day. So I said, here, that's it. And then I thought on the way back out, I said, oh, I'll make him something to eat real quick, because I used to do that. And I just gave him a turkey leg. He was happy about it, but I used to do that whenever the guys came by. And then I gave him a cigarette. And it just took me 20 minutes just to be nice, even though I was busy and I had stuff to do. And I didn't want to be nice to Jimmy but I realized his kids who live in the Bluff, his family, everybody pretty much has told the guys that have had these drug problems for many years, they know what it's like to be ostracized and to be told you are worthless. So I just do that. And then when I left to go to church, sure enough, he's right down the street at the bus stop. And I gave him a couple of cookies because I said, I'm heading out. Here's your dessert. He'll remember that. Those are little things, okay? But sometimes I think we forget to do the little things. Now we're going to teach the Bible. Bethany, what was the message today? Do you remember?
At Church Unlimited?
Yes.
It was the Power of Words.
Okay. And it was a visiting pastor by the name of Eric Dykstra or something like that. He's one of the churches, I believe, like Pastor Bill oversees, different churches, and I believe he's one of them, that pastor who spoke. I don't need to look at most of the outline was verses from Proverbs and from the letter of James. And what I want to do is, a lot of times, if I went back to my I used to make radio recordings. And in the early days, when I used to preach at a little home church I started in Kingsville, I used to make cassette tapes. And I still have some of those tapes. And it's interesting because I'll look at like some of the little titles I put on the old cassette tapes. That's ancient stuff. But I still have some of them at the house. And just about every preacher back in those days had something like the power of words or the power of the tongue. And that was sort of the message today. And it reminded me, so I'm going to quote some of the verses. From Proverbs, famous one, life and death is in the power of the tongue. Okay? There's a lot like that, especially in the book of Proverbs. Now the ones from James is the only book in the New Testament that is in the category of what we call wisdom literature. Okay? Proverbs in the Old Testament is also in that same category, and all it means is a certain type of writing. There's about 5 books in the Old Testament that kind of fit into that. We call them sometimes like the wisdom books. And James in the New Testament is really the only one like that. And if one of the things you'll notice in those books is there'll be little verses, snippets that are like Proverbs, like maybe a little fortune cookie thing, meaning you could just read the one verse and you get something out of it. Okay? So you got books that are in that category. James is one. In James, which I quote a lot, but the verse from James that was shared in the message was, the ships, though they be so great, and are driven about of fierce winds, this is King James I'm quoting, yet they are turned about with a very small helm, whithersoever the governor listeth. And look at the horses. We put bridles on them, and from just turning their mouth or their head, we control their whole body. And so James, I think it's chapter 3, James says, so the tongue in humans is a very small member, yet boasteth great things. Behold, how great a matter a little fire kindleth. So is the tongue among our members. It sets on fire the course of nature, and is set on fire of hell. And the theme of James, when it's talking about speech or the tongue, is, if any man offend not in word, the same as a perfect man, and able also to bridle the whole body. If any man among you seem to be religious, and bridleth not his own tongue, this man's religion is in vain. But pure religion and undefiled before God and the Father is this, to visit the fatherless and widows in their affliction, keep himself unspotted from the world. So there's a theme in the book of James, which was written by the brother of Jesus, okay, who became a believer after the death and resurrection of Jesus, because you have the disciple James, but this is a different James. James in those verses is saying the same type of thing from all the verses from Proverbs. There's a lot in Proverbs about the tongue. Those who speak a lot of words, and the multitude of words that wanteth not sin. So you keep talking, you're going to get trouble. Okay, from these scriptures, you could build a theme or a teaching. Also, Genesis chapter 1 was quoted. I talked about it yesterday. As a matter of fact, I might get into some of that. When God made all things in the creation account in Genesis, it said God spoke. God said, let there be light. God said. Okay, now, that's Genesis chapter 1. So, though we don't understand exactly how all of that works, what we do understand is that God, who is a spirit, communicated, spoke. God said. Now, the word, the Old Testament was written in Hebrew, primarily Hebrew, and the New Testament is written in Greek. Now, there is a word that is translated word in the New Testament from the Greek, okay? And that word is called logos, or logos, L-O-G-O-S. So logos, when you read in your New Testament about word, it's translated from that Greek word. All right. So God made everything by the logos, by speaking. And the disciple John, who wrote the Gospel of John, when he's talking about Jesus, it's in the first chapter, the first few verses. In the beginning was the Word. Okay, now think of this for a second. In Genesis 1, God made everything by speaking. He said, he spoke. In the New Testament, it also says that all things were made through Jesus Christ. Okay? All things were made by him and for him. And without him was not anything made that was made. All right? God spoke. All things were created. But in the New Testament, I just quoted you, it says all things were made by Jesus Christ. Okay? So how could that be? Now I'll quote John 1, the first few verses. In the beginning was the Word, or was Jesus. Everything that God spoke was from the Logos. It's hard for us to understand that. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. The same was in the beginning with God. Okay, so now you have God is a spirit, creating all things by his word, and Jesus Christ was born as a physical human being 2,000 something years ago. And we refer to that as the Word made flesh. John says that. The Word was made flesh and dwelt among us. He says that in his first letter. Okay, John wrote the Gospel of John, 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John, and the book of Revelation. So in his first letter of John, he says, the Word was made flesh. It dwelt among us. We handled him. We touched him. Christmas is coming. We celebrate what we call the Incarnation, which means the Word of God finally became flesh. Okay, God spoke everything, and then there was a time in human history where the Holy Spirit, God himself, came upon the Virgin Mary, and through the Word, she gave birth to Jesus Christ. The Virgin will conceive and bear a child, which is a prophecy in the book of Isaiah. So, it's hard to understand all that. Yesterday I had a conversation with a new lady that came to the Bluff about a week ago, and she's kind of homeless, and she was hanging out in the park, but she does not fit. But yesterday I ran into her at another friend's house, and her name is Jill. And Jill's a Catholic, and I said, oh, I teach Catholic. I even also go to the Mass sometimes. I rotate but she was asking somewhat about the different questions about why there's different churches and all, and I did my best to cover as much history as I could. But I talked somewhat about this yesterday, tried to explain how some divisions arise in Christianity, and I won't do all that I was teaching her, but I said in the 4th century there were these two famous Catholic bishops. This was in the 4th century, 1,600 years ago, 1,700 years ago. And one was named Athanasius, and the other was named Arius. And these were Catholic bishops during the time of the Roman emperor by the name of Constantine. And it's in this century, in the 4th century, which is the 300s, where Christianity became the religion of the empire. Okay? It was quite a feat for it to have gotten that far. And as we study church history, the history says Constantine, who was the Roman emperor, but he actually ascended to that position because there was a division in the Roman Empire at that time. This is called Byzantium, the Byzantine Empire, and you had the Roman Empire divided from the East and the West. And the East eventually becomes what we call the Orthodox Church, the Greek Orthodox Church. The West remained the Roman Catholic Church. But they were divided because Constantine, the emperor, eventually when he ascended to the throne, if you will, he wanted to establish that city, which is Istanbul, Turkey today, by the way, but it was in the eastern part of the Roman Empire. He said, I'm going to make that the new Rome, Constantine, this great city. But before he got to the empire, he had a battle. He had this great fight, and the other guy, I think the other guy he was vying for the position was Maxentius, something like that. But Constantine had a vision of a cross, this is what the story is, and said, in this sign you will conquer. And he had this vision, supposedly, this sign in the heavens, and then he won. And he attributed his victory to God and to Christ. Either way, that's what the story is. That's how I've read it many times. And he says Christianity is going to be the religion of the Roman Empire. Interesting. But he was not into all the religious debates that went on. But the one debate was these two bishops I mentioned, Athanasius and Arius. And what was the division about? Arius, like some of the conversation I had yesterday with one of my other friends, Arius said, it's hard for me to understand how Christians, who he was a Catholic bishop, are referring to Jesus as God, which they certainly were. And Arius said, Jesus, as the Son of God, which he is, but what he said, he is not God. He doesn't hold the same deity as God the Father. That was what Arius was teaching. Now, Arius got off track, but many people listened to him, okay? He wasn't the head of the entire church, but he was very influential. Well, at one point in the 4th century, a lot of the Christians said, okay, we'll go with Arius. He even made a little jingle, a little rhyme, and it caught a lot of people's attention because this was a very big debate. How do we understand the nature of Jesus, this Word of God, this Logos? Well, the other guy I mentioned fought against him, and it went back and forth. But it was over that particular understanding. And yesterday in some of the conversation I had with my friend, he's a knowledgeable friend, but I noticed he holds to the view like Jesus is not God, John, and he knows the Bible, this other friend, I won't mention his name, and I've heard him say that a few times, but then I quoted the other verses, where Thomas in the Gospel of John, when Jesus appears after the resurrection, Thomas says, my Lord and my God. In the Gospel of John, I quoted already, in the beginning was the Word was with God, and the Word was God. That was the key verse, by the way, that settled this dispute. The one I just quoted, that was the big one. They said this settles it. And the Christian church, primarily at that stage, said, we believe Jesus is God. And I can quote you a couple others. In the New Testament it says, great is the mystery of godliness. God was manifest in the flesh. God was manifest in the flesh. When did that happen? When Jesus was born. He's the Word incarnate, meaning he became man. He was seen on in the world and believed on in the world. But God was manifest in the flesh. So that's a couple. I could give you a few more. But those were the key verses why we, as Christians, primarily most Christians, believe in what's called the deity of Christ. That Jesus is God. He is God made flesh and dwelt among us. Now, a lot of that has to do with the simple word, okay? Which I already explained meant logos. And I could do a little bit more, but on that. But let's do the practical part because we're almost done. And so many of the verses, like the ones that were quoted today, it also talked about how practically, as people, the words we speak have power. So if you tell somebody, you'll never be anything good in your life, that affects them, especially as children. And the theme from a lot of the verses in Proverbs, the one in James, the theme is your words have power. Now, many years ago, and even today, a lot of Christians focus on, there were catchphrases. The world you see around you, for instance, the house you live in, your car, whatever, they were teaching, and they still teach, that they are only a product of the words you have spoken. Meaning, if maybe you don't have a good car, a good house, a lot of money, the blame was put on people because you're not speaking abundance. You're not speaking well. And the only way you create your world around you is by the words that you speak. I thought, and this is not new, this has been around for a long time, and I thought a lot of that was not on track. Okay, I had two people in our little church that were ordained ministers from Joel Osteen's church. Well, one was ordained from Joel Osteen's church when Joel Osteen's father, by the name of John Osteen, used to pastor the church. And a lot of emphasis, Joel Osteen's a good preacher and I have nothing against him. But a lot of emphasis was that. So if I looked at Anthony and said, you're having problems with your truck, with the radio, he's put the radio in. The reason you're having problems is because your words, Anthony, this is how that goes. Your words created a crappy truck. or Bethany or whoever. What that did was it put a lot of guilt upon people that had a hard time. Okay? Put a lot of guilt on people. The pressure was on them to change you are creating your world with your words. And one of the ladies that was in our church, who was an ordained minister from the Word of Faith Prosperity Church, but she was ordained out of Lakewood Church in Houston. And they were all good friends of mine. And I remember one day, her name was Yolanda. She passed away. But I said, Yolanda, I tried to show her some verses, 1 Timothy 6. I said, don't put a lot of guilt on yourself, Yolanda. 1 Timothy 6 basically said, I quoted it last week, I'll do it again. Paul says, we came into the world without a lot of things. When we die, we can't take it with us. So don't get so hung up on things around you. Okay? And she was living in poverty, welfare, but always had that confession of trying to create her world by her words. And unconsciously, the teachings she was in at that time put her under condemnation because she was listening to a lot of preachers who were quite wealthy, and they were teaching through the TV and stuff. If you're living in difficulty, you created that. And one of her daughters killed one of my friends, by the way. Yes, it was her daughter. It was her daughter. Stabbed a friend of mine. This was many years ago. It was a debate. They had problems in their lives, okay? And all the names, some of these friends, my daughter might remember, so I won't say the names. Now, all I tried to explain to my friend, I said, don't put guilt on yourself that you have created all this world around you, because that was very common for them to teach that. It said there are things also that happen in people's lives that are things that you don't blame yourself for those things. So as we teach, and a lot of people taught, that everything that's happened to you is simply a product of the words you have spoken throughout your life, I just felt that was not real balanced. But the principle is biblical. Okay? The principle, a lot of the verses, and the way I kind of also would explain it is the letter of James, who James said, I quoted that earlier, he said, what you speak, what you say, and it's going to affect you. But many of the Christians in the church at Jerusalem, where James was like the lead pastor of the church of Jerusalem in Acts 15, many of them were in poverty and difficulty and suffering. And James also says in that letter, it talks about difficulty. James talks about suffering. So was James himself contradicting what he wrote? You see, somewhere under the thing, if I ever say anything negative that's going to, it's my fault. If I ever say anything that's bad, that means I'm reaping. So you want to have a balance. So I would say the good balance is, because we're going to end this, the good balance is speak good words, speak words of life. One good example I could give you at the end here was one time Jesus makes this confession. And this is what he says. This is what comes out of his mouth. He says, the Son of Man is going to be delivered into the hands of sinful men. And he's going to be killed, talking about himself. He's going to be crucified. He's going to go to Jerusalem, and they're going to hang him on a cross. And they also tortured him and beat the hell out of him. It was called scourging. Now, he comes up and says that one day. What kind of confession is that? And Peter said to him, he rebuked him. Peter said, not so. Far be it from us. In essence, Peter could have been saying, watch what you're saying, Jesus. Because you could become a product of that confession, Jesus. So many words. Peter rebuked him. And then Jesus told Peter, get thee behind me, Satan. For you're more concerned with the things of men than you are with the things of God. Now, the crucifixion of Jesus, his death, his punishment, that was not a result of a bad confession that he made. The reason Jesus made that confession is because that was the will of God for him. And you say, but John, does that apply to us? Look, I can quote you a lot of verses, but Jesus said, whoever wants to follow me and is not willing to take his cross and do it, then he's not worthy of me. So a big part of the Christian life is don't focus on creating a comfortable environment around you. That's not what it's about. God will reveal his will to you throughout your life. And then Jesus obviously knew his purpose for the incarnation, his purpose for becoming man. He was born to die. Now, at the end, it worked out good because he rose from the dead, he redeemed men, he fulfilled the purpose of God. See, that's how you measure success. It's whether you fulfill the purpose of God, not how comfortable you've created a life around you. Okay, now we're going to end it on that.
Don't forget the dream.
But I remembered at the end I'm going to say the dream. Now, when I had that dream a few weeks ago, I remembered, I said, there's going to be a Zachary. Somehow it's going to happen. That's how I remember these things. Now, last week, I did a video. Oh, but I did it outside. I took the quad, said, I'll go teach over there because we did Thanksgiving here. But I did make the video last week. Oh, no, Thursday I did it, yeah. Thanksgiving. So we were here for Thanksgiving. And there's kids playing outside, and I heard the kids playing. And in my mind, I remembered, I said, oh, I got that little ball I found in H-E-B. So I got up, and I got that little ball, and I walked over to the kids, and I said, I don't know their names, I don't know those kids. And I said, come here. And the one kid looked at me. They're living right here next door as I make the video. And I said, this is for you. And it's like a brand new toy, maybe a $5 toy. So I said to the kid, this is for you. And now he looks at me like if you just gave me I want to buy a motorcycle. He had the look like if I just got a brand new Harley Davidson, kids see things. And he was so happy. And then he kind of laughed a little. And then he ran away. I wasn't even looking. And then I heard, I guess, his sister. She said, Zachary.
One of the friends across the street, yeah.
Oh, and I said, that's it. That's the Zachary. And you say, but that's so silly. What about those other dreams you shared, John, which kind of were maybe more important? Would God speak about a little kid? Jesus said, permit the little kids to come to me, but such is the kingdom of heaven. But I think that was it. I think that was this, as silly as that might sound. Jesus said, all the hairs on our head are numbered. God cares if he cares for the birds that die, don't you think he cares for us? So I think that could be the most important dream. And so that's kind of how I want to end it. And it was important. If I didn't obey when I thought, give that ball to that kid, I never would have heard the Zachary, I don't think. So sometimes God will give you a dream. He'll speak to you through a dream. But you got to walk in obedience, and that's a real small example of it. So then you got to follow what he's telling you. If you're not walking in the will of God, even a simple thing, go give the kid the ball, then maybe you won't see, the fulfillment of whatever it was that God might have told you. So that's a big part of it. All right, we did the Word, we did the Logos. Jesus himself is the Word, and in our lives, the importance of our words. Okay, death and life are in the power of the tongue. Meaning, let's speak good things. Let's speak words of life. Let's speak stuff that builds people up. Any questions?
No.
Anthony?
Thank you.
I don't want to tell my Pep Boy story because that is, I told my son-in-law about, but that'll be words of death, so I don't want to get into that. All right, let's end in prayer. Father, I thank you for letting us do a little teaching. I pray that you bless each person. I speak words of blessing over everybody that watches the videos. I pray that you bless them. I pray that you'd help us to follow the example of Jesus Christ, who was the Word made flesh. We ask it in Jesus' name. Amen.